Right. Thank you too for joining us. I don't think there's been a busier time for diplomats in New Delhi, at least in the recent past, right? So you all must be in huge demand at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think India is in huge demand, to be honest. I've never seen such interest in the country. And I think that's for a number of reasons. That's partly about a UK thing as we look to India to create a kind of stronger and deeper partnership, which we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years. It's partly because India is growing, and it's partly because India has the G20 presidency, and we can talk a bit about that. And also long term, this is going to be the center of the world, India and the Indo-Pacific, whether it's in population, whether it's in terms of economics. India will be one of the 3 defining countries of the rest of my life, alongside the United States and China.
Okay. All through this morning, we've had several aspects of India's G20 leadership being discussed. Some say digital, some talk about the emerging economy, some talk about the power that India has become. According to you, what would be the defining aspect of India's G20 leadership? Whether it is cultural, whether it is psychological, what's the impact of this leadership from your point of view?
It's a little early to answer the question because, of course, we have the summit coming up in 2 weeks' time. But I would say that India has broken the mold on how you do a G20 presidency. I don't think any succeeding presidency is going to be able to go back to the past, because what India has done is to have this take its huge scale and apply it to the G20. That means we've been to the most amazing parts of India. I was in the Andaman Islands at the start of the G20 presidency. It was a fantastic privilege to be there. Everywhere from Lakshadweep as well, there's been a meeting there, all over the country. And so that scale, and the great thing is it's brought a lot of people here. I'm sure it's true of the States as well. Today we've got the global chief executive of HSBC, the global CEO of BP are both here. I've had a cabinet minister every week for the last few weeks. Some of them are learning about India. Some of them know about India already. It was great to take our finance minister, who 30 years ago, like me, had lived in India, to come back and see Bangalore 30 years later. So the scale and the application of the scale, but also the ambition. And the ambition to tackle the big problems of the world. And I think Amitabh Kant spoke a bit about that this morning when he talked about global hunger, the fact that you have more people in poverty, the fact that you have low growth in some parts of the world. Finally, I think India and the G20 Sherpa has brought tremendous energy. We always talk about now moving on to renewables. I think if you wired Amitabh Kant up, I think you could probably power most of Delhi off that man's energy.
You, Atul?
I'm a retired diplomat, so I'll give a business perspective because I now work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I think India's vision that it has set out in its G20 year through all of the various events is very positive, it's very compelling, and it's very focused on the human being. I grew up in Africa. I was born in Africa, grew up in Africa. Of course, I'm an American. I have an Indian parentage as well. And I see how what India is doing for its own citizens is potentially scalable for countries all around the world. You look at the fintech here, the digital empowerment, the environmental stewardship. These are positive visions. And so this G20 year has been remarkable, not just for all of the reasons that Alex has mentioned, but for the fact that it focuses on the human being. And this is where your business community and the American and British and other business communities help fuel the innovation that is going to help us all to live happier, more prosperous, and frankly, more meaningful lives. And the other great thing about the Indian vision for the G20 in this year is that it also focuses on the future freedom and happiness of humanity. And at the U.S. Chamber, we do believe in the founder's vision of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we see that in everything that India is doing. So I really applaud what India has done.
Okay, interesting points both of you have made, but as you go forward, and this is a year ago, we started having the Ukraine conflict. Has there been a change in the way India has been seen since then, or is that still the elephant in the room?
I'm very careful not to mix India and elephants in any metaphor, which I now try to produce. So the interest in India and India's power in the world is a long-term thing. Yeah? That's already there. It will grow a lot over the next decade. As I say, India will be one of the 3 most impactful countries in the world. Russia's invasion of Ukraine shows the very contested world we're in, where an autocracy can basically invade a democracy and try to take its territory. We thought we'd kind of put an end to that in Europe, and Europe has had the most terrible experience of that, and thanks to the support of the United States, got over that experience. So it's a very shocking thing to see inside Europe. What you also see is the global consequences of what at first was described as a European war. But let's look at what's happened. Besides the terrible human damage done to people in Ukraine and to the territory of Ukraine, including its infrastructure, its dams and so forth, that invasion has pushed up grain prices. Now, Russia firing missiles to try and wreck the ports of Ukraine to push up grain prices even further has an impact directly onto inflation in the Punjab. So this is a global issue. And I agree with what the Indian government said at the start, where you've got to respect territorial integrity, the rule of law, and the UN Charter. Now, the doing of that is tough. But I think that India will remain an extremely central country for the world. And we have to come together to find a way of dealing with what Russia has done in Ukraine.
Okay, taking that question one step further, one of the concerns has been that when you see foreign policy purely from a particular prism, are we then recognizing the predicament, if I can call it that, for a country like India in a situation of this nature, and how will this possibly be a barrier or a hurdle as you move forward?
So I think a lot of countries have been thrust into very difficult situations because of Mr. Putin's misadventure in Ukraine. If you look at the fuel prices and the food prices that the High Commissioner mentioned, it is having an extremely deleterious effect in countries in South Asia, in Africa, all around the world. And these are countries that don't have India's strength, they don't have India's prosperity. And so I think the collective, the world collective, has been trying to address these very dire implications, these global implications of the war. That said, we all, I think, agree that the war must end. It's unacceptable. There's a lot of human suffering. And that's where we have to focus on mitigating that human suffering. And that includes coherent economic policies that boost economic growth so that countries can get over, in many cases, foreign exchange crises that have happened. India, of course, has over $600 billion in foreign currency reserves. It doesn't face that crisis, but many of its neighbors do. And India has been exceptionally generous toward its neighbors. And the United States and Great Britain and others have worked very hard to try to mitigate that human impact. Also, I think there's a realization that countries have to develop closer relations. So, for instance, this year in my country, we had the great honor of welcoming the Prime Minister of India for only the third official state visit by a leader from India in the entire history of our relationship. It was, I would say, a sixer. You guys knocked the ball out of the park, out of the stadium, and had a magnificent visit that resonated so well with the American people and focused our future effort on the things that reflect our shared values, our shared work program, and bring us even closer together. So when these problems happen in world affairs, the challenge is how to react to them. And I think the US and India are reacting in a very constructive and positive way, looking at a very future-focused frame about the happiness of our countries, our citizens, and frankly, all of humanity.
Would you see that as a fundamental change in the Indo-US relations, post this visit? The fact that, okay, we have our sticking points, let's keep that aside, but we can't allow that to have an impact on the other aspects of our relationship, which has become essential for both sides.
So the wave chop in international relations is only getting higher. And there's a lot of uncertainty, geostrategic uncertainty. This is the worst war in Europe since World War II. And it has not been a short war. It is indeed lingering in ways that make life very tough for Ukrainian people and many others besides. But there's also geostrategic uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific region. And so I think that pragmatic, forward-leaning countries that are democracies like the United States and India find that they have even greater relevance for each other, including in things like the Quad with other democracies. This is the sort of collaboration that I think is going to be the focus of the United States and other countries going forward, is who are our friends, with whom do we have shared values, And what can we do together to ensure the future happiness of humanity and human freedom? Again, I'm a retired diplomat, but these are my observations based on what I see as a very collaborative framework between Delhi and Washington over the past year.
Retired diplomats have the liberty of being a little more honest and open than a serving one. But, you know, just putting this across, Amitabh Kant, and taking off from the point that you made, India Sherpa Amitabh Kant said the G20 under India's leadership is more powerful than the UN Security Council. How would you respond to that?
I'd like to point out that serving diplomats can also be honest as well. It's not part of the job description. So they do different things. What the G20 brings is the kind of mass of roughly 80% of the world's GDP, I would think. And that includes, and it's a body which can actually reflect the shift in growth over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, the sort of G7/EU GDP was about, I can't remember how much it was in the world, but it's roughly, it's dropped quite a lot. And, the new countries have grown a great deal. So it reflects that. It was actually revived by, dare I say, the United States and the United Kingdom in 2008 when we had the global financial crisis. If you remember then, there was a huge international effort led by the United States and the UK to try and address that problem. So it serves its purpose well. What I really like about the Indian presidency is kind of injected some new life into it and has that ambition about the big global problems we need to face. The UN Security Council and the UN system as a whole, well, it's the system we've got. It's the United Nations, and we've got to make it work. There is no choice in that from my point of view. It needs reform. The Security Council definitely needs reform, including India coming onto the Security Council. But you have to make work what you have, because at the same time as the world's probably more divided than when I've been kind of working professionally. I joined the Foreign Service in 1990. The big global problems have got bigger. And so you have that tension between both the dysfunctioning parts of the international system, but the need for it to address the really big things, health security, climate security, a whole host of other stuff.
So given that point that you make, saying that the world is more divided, would something like a G20, and I'm just trying to understand the import of that statement, would G20 become then a possible additional platform where you could have conversations even between these two sides, which are very difficult? Countries like India could potentially be the ones which can facilitate the conversations in a divided world.
I mean, to be honest, there is Russia invading Ukraine, and then there's most of the rest of the world. So in that sense, most of the rest of the world would say, we really want to get on, as India
and
does.
China as well on another side.
I mean, China has a particular position as well, and that's been tough work. I must say, can I just pay respect to the G20 presidency for trying to persevere with getting agreed texts and stuff like that. This is really important stuff. Digital public infrastructure, deforestation, we have been backing the Indian presidency all the way. So actually, I think the vast majority want to get on with dealing with those issues. The trouble is, one of the members of the G20 invading a democracy to kind of inject something very poisonous into that international system, and that's what we're trying to deal with.
You would like to add on to that?
I think the UN Security Council would greatly benefit from having India on board.
That's an interesting one. In terms of your quintessential moment of India's G20 presidency, if you were to take one defining moment in this whole thing, what would that be? I mean, is there something, or would you like to wait for the leaders meet before you choose the moment that you want?
So for me, whenever I come to India, I feel like my dreams as a little boy have come true. Because I've been coming to India since I was a baby. My parents came here every year for the first 15 years of my life. And we would go to Panipat and sit in my grandmother's house with no electricity. There was certainly no internet back then. There wasn't even TV. I remember when the flush toilets were put in. So I'm revealing my age a little bit. But when you look at the India of today, and I've been very privileged and fortunate to go all around this country in the recent past, it is amazing the pace of revolutionary change in the lives of Indian people. If you look at telephony, I remember when it took almost an act of Congress to make a telephone call between Panipat and Delhi. You had to book the call, then go home, then wait for the kid to come and say, no, now the call has come. Then you scream down the phone line. With a little bit of age, you gain perspective. And I feel like that India of my dreams has already been achieved. What is critical now is to see in this G20 year the realization of the dreams of the Indians of today. And I think India is going to achieve those dreams. It is truly going to shine on the global stage over the next 30, 40, 50 years, and it's frankly going to make the world better. So I'm very positive and optimistic. I've seen this country come so far. I see Indians living happier lives, and I pray that that continues for a very long time to come.
Well, that's reflective of the people-to-people contact we've had over decades between both the countries. And when you speak about that, as far as the UK is concerned, one of the sticking points, one of the issues that's in conversation at the moment is the free trade agreement. Is there a deadline for it? Is there something you can, in your honest self as a diplomat, serving diplomat, give us a little bit of a insight into what's happening?
I've just come out of the meeting between our two trade ministers, Piyush Goyal and Kemi Badenoch. That was a very good meeting. Our minister would always say text before time, that you have to get the text right rather than setting artificial deadlines. I think, firstly, we have come a long way. We actually closed the majority of the chapters of the FTA. Secondly, they were now discussing today some of the tough stuff which we need to deal with to get this deal right. It has to be a deal which works for both sides. But I think, thirdly, I saw kind of determination and ambition on both sides to get this done. It's a huge opportunity for both sides. It provides a lot of economic benefit. It'll increase trade and investment, and that's got to be good for both of our countries. I think it has a strategic benefit as well. Going back to what Atul was saying earlier about the kind of world we're in, that between two democracies, which are the fifth and sixth biggest economies in the world, you can create a trade deal. I think that sends a pretty powerful signal to the rest of the world about what can be done.
Okay. And in terms of increasing free movement between the two countries, it's again, it looks very differently when you look at it from an India point of view, and looks very differently when you see it from a Washington or a London. What steps do you think are being taken, or the concrete roadmap for that?
So I think it's critical that we facilitate the free movement of free people in order to ensure the strongest possible growth of the U.S.-India relationship. Wait times have to be addressed, and they are being urgently addressed by my former colleagues, and I applaud them, and I hope they succeed famously. One of the most important elements of this is the announcement in the joint statement of the President and the Prime Minister to announce 2 new consulates of the United States in India, in Bangalore and in Ahmedabad, and increasing Indian consulates in the United States. This is very, very important. However, we still have to speed it up so that people don't have to wait so long. This is, in a way, although it's no consolation, a very good problem to have, because what it reflects is the sheer demand for travel between the United States and India. And you see all of the proliferation of nonstop flights between our two countries, something unimaginable when I was a kid. You had to transfer Frankfurt at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so we've come a long way, but we urgently need to fix the problem. And I'm very happy in my conversations with my colleagues, former colleagues at the US government, that they understand the problem, they're working very hard on it, and they're putting real money and resources into trying to address it.
In the case of the UK, India tops all 3 of our main visa categories: students, visits, and skilled workers. A third of all visas in those 3 categories go to Indian nationals. India's overtaken China as the #1 supplier of international students to the UK. I'm delighted to say, sorry Atul, that our waiting times are excellent, turning around our visit visas in 13 days within the 15-day working day standard. So there's a huge flow. Now that's an old flow as well, and you can see that by the inhabitants of number 10 Downing Street. I mean, did you ever imagine that you would see the person who lives in number 10 Downing Street on India's National Day, the 15th of August, in one of the greatest and oldest universities of the world, saying Jai Shri Ram? Yeah? I think Lord Curzon would have... Lord Curzon would have choked on his kedgeree if he'd ever heard that. So it tells you something about the change in the UK and the benefit which having that flow of people between India and the UK brings. We do have one problem, and the problem is I want more British people to come here. I think that not enough people in the UK know the reality of India today and India tomorrow. And to go back to the question you asked earlier, which I took a really good response to, if I have one thing which defines me that India's G20 presidency is that when a British minister comes here, when a British official comes in, they come all over the country, what they see is tomorrow's world.
Interesting. That's a real deep insight into what you see. As we build on this going forward, what do you think are the critical challenges ahead? Because much of this is still work in progress. And what do you think are 3 or 4 things that India as a country needs to be extremely cautious about? And also, from a global point of view, the people are looking very closely at as indicators for the road ahead.
I'll talk about the UK and India together, but also the world more generally. The promotion of freedom and opportunity around the world is going to be one of the biggest challenges and the most important things, because you want to give the next generation those opportunities. So we have to do that together. One of the things you learn from Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that every country needs friends. Ukraine is much smaller than Russia, but it has friends, and it sees the opportunity. It's brought the country together, and I think we have to learn from that to develop that opportunity. Number one. Secondly, we have to do this sustainably. What India does internally in terms of the building of the cities of the future, the infrastructure of the future, is going to determine to an extent what happens to our climate. Now, it's tough on India. India didn't produce these emissions historically. My country did, the United States did. But we have to work together to find the solutions of the future, and that is very much a joint effort. The third one I pick out is health and health security. The best thing the UK and India have done together in a very long time is the Covishield vaccine. Started in a great university in the UK, developed by a British firm, but then India's vast scale and capacity to produce a vaccine, which is a complex thing to produce, and put it into over 1 billion people, including in the neighbours. I completely agree about the generosity of that. That is something you do together. And those 3 things seem to be worthwhile tasks for the next 20 years.
Hi, Commissioner. May I steal your phraseology from your previous question? It was so superb about how when you come to India, you get that sense in the G20 year of the vision of the future. I love it. So hopefully I'll avoid paying royalties on it, but I'm going to steal it and use it a lot. If I may, I'll confine my response to the business and economic environment. I think this is, in fact, emphatically India's golden moment. The whole world is realizing the stability and the opportunity and the reliability and the positivity of India. And so my respectful appeal would be, and I hear this from the members of my trade council, is that in this golden moment, India can do a lot to appeal to the psychology of capital. Investment in will create jobs, it'll create prosperity, it'll result in exports, it'll create a boost in GDP. Frankly, seeing India be a $5, $10, $20 trillion economy is good for the United States, it's good for the entire world, and we want to see it happen. So in this regard, my mantras, or shlokas as it will, are ease of doing business, level playing field, and regulatory and policy predictability. If these things happen, I think you will see the world of global business beat a path to your door and help accelerate the process of India's rise to becoming potentially the largest economy on earth.
As you make that point, quick last few questions. Do you believe domestic political developments in the US perhaps would have an impact? Is there a growing, one gets all kinds of news from the US. So would you believe that those would have an impact in the long term? How is that being seen across the board?
Well, you could have a closed system where you hide all of your flaws and problems, where you don't have a robust internal debate, your people can't speak freely, and someone tells them what to do. I personally don't think that's a good governance model for humanity. We are free, and we should remain free. So in the United States, and I speak as a private citizen, the disclaimer I'll keep issuing, we do our business in public, in the harsh light of the TV glare light, of the lights. And that's kind of healthy, right? Ours is a robust, messy democracy. Every one of our citizens proudly expresses their opinions, and it's cathartic. I would argue that coming out of the pandemic, free societies like India, the United States, the United Kingdom have powered through the pandemic and have come out of it much better off. We've had a brutal time, we've lost millions of citizens, and yet our democracies essentially reinforce the robust nature of our societies. There are many other models that are far more brittle, that have a lot more risk, And so our democracy is 240 years old. It is robust. It has been through some really tough times. And I think it will continue to power through because we do it in a very cathartic kind of manner as free people do.
We're not yet trumped as yet. So, you've had a great time in India. You've enjoyed the food. You've had the music. Is there one above all that you find the most attractive aspect, the aspect that you enjoyed the most?
I love the food. I was having a dal bati last week in Jodhpur with some churma afterwards, absolutely fantastic. Rasgulla in Casey Das in Kolkata, I remember that, it's a fantastic.
And you're still
all the Bengalis out there.
There.
Just thought I better get that in there. I had my head taken off by a lal mas in Jaisalmer, which took me to the extremes of everything. It was an amazing dish. Great fish curry in Goa as well. Actually, I love the food. I'm a cricket nut, so I love all that. And as you know, I love the music too. And
is there a song that you'd like to sing for us?
Well, you have a wonderful national anthem.
I'm from South India.
We have a great national anthem as well. But I was thinking, what is the song which we should be singing together in the future? Which, and I thought, Ye dosti hum nahi chhodenge, todenge dam agar मैं तेरे बारात के साथ ना छोड़ेंगे.
Wow. That's fascinating. Do you want to have a go?
I am going to defer and submit and bow down to the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom. He did a great job. But what I will say is that India delights me every day in so many different ways. The food, obviously, the fact that there's been so much development in the course of my lifetime. And India touches the heart in unexpected ways all the time. I have a daughter who was born here in India, and so India remains immensely precious to me. My wife and I spent some of our most wonderful years in the Foreign Service here in India, and so that feeling of the heart always abides. And I wish India the greatest of success and happiness.
Well, I think the most beautiful aspect of the song that you sang is that I'm from South India and it's still iconic for me, Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra on a bullet singing this song. So that's possibly the story of India. Ye dosti hum nahi chodenge. So that's fascinating for the two of you to have shared your thoughts. If there is any question from the audience, don't ask them to sing another song. Anything else is okay. Please, sir.
Can you throw some light on that?
Sir, could you repeat your question? Because we have a television audience watching this as well. And
shall I answer the question by repeating the question? The question was about how do you end the war in Ukraine, given the situation on the ground, sir, if I understand, General. And, well, there's a simple answer, which is Russia goes back to its own territory and Ukraine is allowed to live in its own territory. And I think anyone in this room is going to be sensitive to autocracies deciding arbitrarily to invade democracies. What you have to have is to look across the whole thing, and actually Zelensky's produced a peace plan, others have as well. But you have to, if you concede the principle that an autocracy can occupy a democracy's land and stay there, then that is a very concerning principle for the world as a whole. In the end, it will require international support. That's why I think India was right to reference the UN Charter in its first statement it made about it. We are going to have to find a way to deal with this. But it is tough.
On that note, I think we'll have to end this conversation for the next session. I'm sorry, we don't have time for any further questions. Thank you, too, for that fascinating conversation. And thank you, High Commissioner, for that.
What's the word?
for the song. Fascinating. Thanks. Lovely. Show stealer, yes. Thank you, too, for joining us.